Hello everyone. In today's session, we are going to see how to implement infinite scrolling using JavaScript. We are going to create an application called Users Dashboard that you are seeing on my screen. On the page load, we fetch 10 users and render it on the UI. As we scroll down and just before reaching the 10th user or the last element on the UI, we make a service call and fetch another new 10 users. Likewise, we load 10 new users as we scroll down to the last element each time, and we follow this process until we completely loaded all the users. Let's get started. As always, we have index.html, style.css and app.js files created. We are going to focus mainly on JavaScript part. So I have already defined all the required CSS in style.css file. Now let's go to index.html. Here we have defined application header already. Now we need to define this user header with all the column names. So let's go to main section and here define a section with CSS class container, and inside that let us define user header, user underscore header. We are using display flex on user header, so it acts like a flex container. Now let's create all the columns, user logo and column name avatar. Control enter for next line, user name and column name user name, space name, enter, control enter, user country, and finally user email. That's it. Now let's go to document and there we go. We have avatar, username, country and email. Now let us create this user content or user row. So for that let us define another section with the CSS class user underscore container. As I said, we have defined all the CSS class already in the style.css. We need to define the user, and inside that we can use all these column names code. So take this and use it here, and here instead of avatar we need to use the image tag to show the image, right? So let's use image and we are going to show some image, user.png user. Okay, I think it should be JPG. Save it. Yes. And for the username, so I quickly add the data here. So John Smith and country Australia and email something like gmail.com. Now we can see that this alignment is not proper. So to make this alignment vertically center, we can use the align self. So I have created a CSS class called item. So I'm going to use it. There we go. Now we are done with this alignment. Now what to do? We need to fetch the users and we need to render the users dynamically. So in this session I am going to use random user API and it is open source and you need to sign up. Just go to documentation and click on seeds. Just scroll down. There you can see pagination. Under the pagination we can see the sample URL. So just copy this and open new tab. And here page number 3, right? Just say 1 and results 10. So how many users you want at a time? So I would like to have 10 users at a time, so leave it as it is. And seed is equal to abc, some default value, just leave it as it is and just press enter. Then we are going to get the 10 users here. I am using the JSON formatter extension, so I am able to see the JSON format. So here results object is containing the array of users, and here you can see gender, name, location and email. Even we have the picture. So we are going to use these properties like picture, email, location and name, right? Now let's copy this URL and go to app.js. Write a function to fetch the users from API. So function get random users. Pass two parameters like page number and page size, because we need to pass the page number and number of users we want each time we make the service call. Let's declare URL. Let URL equal to, use the backticks and paste the URL that we copied. Now just expand this, and using JavaScript fetch API we are going to fetch the users. So fetch and here use the URL and it returns the promise. So then and we get the response. On response we need to use the JSON response, which again returns the promise. So once again we need to consume it, and here we get the data, and we know that we have all these array of users in the results object, right? So take this results object, and here let's print console.log results, and let us invoke this function. So get random users, and here we need to pass the page number and page size. So let us create global variables here. Say let page number equal to 1 by default, because on page load we pass 1, and then let page size, each time we want 10 users, so 10. So here just pass page number comma page size. Now just minimize it and go to our working version, press F12. So we are in the network tab, and just refresh the page. There we go. Now we make the call and we got the results here. Here we have the 10 users. Once we got the users, we need to render them on the UI. This time we are going to create a arrow function with the function expression. So constant render user equal to, so arrow function, render user will take the parameter user. And now go to index.html, and currently we have the user here HTML, which is static. Just cut it and go to app.js and create variable HTML string equal to, use the backticks, use this entire thing. We need to bind this user data to the UI. In the user response we have the name object, and name object is having the properties like first name and last, and the same way we have the location. Under the location we have the country. In the same way picture also we have large, like this. We are going to do the object destructuring. Let equal to user, and now we are going to fetch the first name and last name, right? So name, so we are going to do the nested object destructuring. So here we need to have only first name and last name, right? So mention first and last. Now this will give us only first and last, and it will omit this title, right? We don't require the title. And the similarly location, and under the location we have so many properties, right? Like street, city, everything, but we want only country. So take this country and just use the object again and just mention country. Email, so email is the direct property, so just use email. Picture, so take the picture, and under the picture we are going to take medium one, so medium. And for the medium I am going to give alias name again, user image. That's it, right? We have all the details now. So now let us bind the data. So for the src, just remove this user.jpg and just use dollar, say user image. We no need to mention name dot first, simply first space last. For the country you can simply say dollar country, and for the email finally. So now we are done with the binding. Now we need to append this element to the container. So we are going to append this to the users container. Let us access this in the app.js. Constant user container equal to document dot query selector, and you are using the class name, so dot class name, and take this user container. Here comes the DOM manipulation. So in order to append this HTML string to the container, we need to use the method called InsertAdjacentHtml. User container dot InsertAdjacentHtml, and it takes two parameters. The first one is inserting position, and the second one is HTML string before end. So before end of the element, HTML string. Okay, you can make it HTML string. Yeah. Here we are getting the users data, right? Data and data dot results and dot results dot, for each method we are going to use. We are going to use the arrow function again. It gives the user, render user user. Save it. Now let's go to our UI and see. Okay, it is not happening, so something wrong. Let's press F12. Okay, sorry, I am disconnected from the internet. Refresh. There we go. Now we have rendered the user's data, but I don't see any scroll bar here. We should have vertical scroll bar. Go to style.css and go to users container. Yeah, here we have defined height. Let's go to index.html. Okay, Here class name is user container, but it should be users container. So we need to make one more change. Take this and go to app.js, and here instead of user container it should be users container. Yeah, now we get the scroll bar. Yeah, this is custom scroll bar. I will tell you in other session how to make this. Now it's time to implement infinite scrolling, and we are going to implement it using intersection observer API in JavaScript. So let's create intersection observer object. So infinite scroll observer equal to new intersection observer, and it takes two parameters, a callback function and object for options. So callback function and then options, right? Just object. And again this callback function will take two parameters like entries and observer. So let us take out this callback function and define outside. Cut it, constant infinite scroll callback equal to, and I am going to make few changes to this get random users function, and here instead of consuming it twice, let us use the async and await. Just comment this entire code, Control KC for commenting. Take this and here let's say response equal to, we are going to use await fetch URL and it returns the promise. So again constant data equal to await response.json, and then finally just return data. And in order to use the await, we need to make this function as async, right? So this is the common thing everyone will miss. Now this get random users function will returns the promise because we are using async. So here we are calling this get random users on the page load. So now I am going to create one more function called load users, and again arrow function. Call this inside the load users. So cut it. This should take two parameters like page number and page size. As I said, this get random users will return the promise, right? So let us consume it. So dot then, and we are going to get the data. So here we are returning the data, right? So data, and once we got the data, we need to render it on the UI. So for that, let us take this logic. Now let's go to the browser and refresh. It is working as expected. Now as we scroll down to the last user, we need to fetch the new 10 users. So for that we need to observe this last user. So here we are calling these load users on the page load. So once we fetch the data and render it on the UI, then we need to observe the last element. So let's create a variable called let is page load equal to true. Take this. So here let's say if is page load. So if it is page load, then we need to access the last user on the UI. So we are rendering the users in user container, right? So take this, write a function to get the last user. Get last user element equal to, so let's write a array function and which returns the last element, right? So comment dot query selector, and here we are using user container, and inside the user container we are entering the users user colon last child. So it returns the last user always. Let's write another function called constant observe last user equal to arrow function infinite scroll observer object dot observe method, and here we are calling get last user element function which gives the last user, and we are observing it. Now take this observe last user, and if it is page load, just call this observe last user and then make is page load equal to false. Here the flow is very simple. We are calling this load users on the page load, and once we got the data and render it on the UI, then we are calling this observe last user, and inside the observe last user we are getting the last user that is rendered on the UI, and we are observing that last user using infinite scroll observer. Now come to this infinite scroll observer callback function, and here just print console.log entries. Now press F12, and here you can see that array of 1. So here we have the intersection observer entry, which is nothing but our last user. Just scroll down to the last user. There we go. Now we can see that intersection observer entry. So as soon as this last user is intersecting, then we can see that the callback function of intersection observer will fire and it will print this. Now whenever this intersection observer callback function fires, we need to make this load users data by passing the page number 2, because we have already loaded the data with the page number 1. So we need to increment the page number and then we need to make this load users call. So first let us access the entry. So const entry equal to entries of 0, because we have the intersection observer entry at the 0 position. And then here we write the logic like if not entry dot is intersecting, which means if entry is not available in the viewport, then just return and don't do anything. Otherwise we need to make a call to this load users. So load users, and before that we need to increment the page number, right? So page number plus equal to 1, and here we are going to pass page number and page size. Now go to the browser and bring up network tab. Scroll down. Whenever last user is intersecting viewport, we can see a service call is made and we have the results and they are rendered on the UI. But still we are passing the page number 1 to the service call. We need to change the hard-coded value in the URL. Change it to page number, and the same way here page size also. Save it. Just refresh. And on the page load we are passing page number 1, and then just scroll down, and whenever we reach the last user we can see another service call is made, and this time we got the 10 new users, right? And if we just scroll down to the last user, this time we don't see any new call is made because the last user is changed now. So now we need to observe this user. In the callback function of intersection observer, we need to observe the latest last user. So after making this load users function and rendering the latest users at the UI, we need to call the observe last user function, which always fetch the last user and observe to it. Right? Now if we save it, what will happen? It won't work because this load user function calls the get random users function, which works asynchronously. So for that reason we need to call this observe last user function once this get random users completed. So for this I am going to create a promise inside the load users, and once this get random users function is done with fetching users and rendering on the UI, then I will resolve it. So here done new promise, and it takes resolve and reject parameters, and let's cut this entire thing. Once we fetch the data and rendering on the UI, then we are going to resolve this promise. So here let's say resolve completed rendering, just add catch block here which takes error, and maybe we need to use this resolve here, reject error. That's it, right? Now this load user will return a promise. So now let us consume it, then data, or maybe you can say response. So just response. Inside this callback function we are going to observe the last user. So once the get random users is completed, then we are going to observe the last user. Now let's go to the browser and refresh, open network tab. Now as soon as we reach the last element, we can see that it makes a call by passing page number 2 and all the users are rendered on the UI. And once again we reach the last user, then it will make a call, now this time page number 3, and once again go to the last user, now page number 4. So this way you can see that now infinite scroll is working, isn't it? So each time we scroll to the last user, we can see that a service call is made with the latest page number. Now what we do, just scroll up. See, even though we are scrolling up, still it is making call. Here once we make this load users function call, we need to unobserve to the current last user, so which is nothing but our entry.target. So here we are going to use this observer, take this observer parameter dot unobserve, and we are going to say entry.target is our last user, right? So save it and press F12, and this time go to the elements tab and just expand Observe this user container here. As we scroll down to the last user, you can see a service call will be made and new users will be added, right? As soon as you scroll down, you can see that new users will be added. And now this time just scroll up. Unlike last time, this time we don't see any service calls are made and we don't see any new data is added, right? So you can go to network tab and you can observe that. We are in the page 7. Just scroll down page 7, page 8, page 9. Now just scroll up. Unlike last time, now we don't see any service calls are made because we just unobserved to the current last user. So this way we can implement the infinite scrolling using JavaScript. So everything is good, but one last thing we need to do is we need to show the loading icon, right? Go to index.html, just define a div with the loading. So loading. By default we are hiding this loading image. So go to app.js, constant loading element equal to document.querySelector. Let's define a function called toggle loading, and it takes parameter like is loading element dot class list dot toggle, and we are going to add the CSS class show, and then we are going to say is loading. Take this toggle loading, call this just before we are loading it. So toggle loading of true. There we go. Now we can see that this loading icon is being shown. Once we done with loading the users, we need to stop this loading GIF. So here load users returns the promise, right? So just consume it here dot then just data, and even if there is any error, catch error. So we are going to use this toggling and let's say false. Take this and use it here, save it, and let's go to UI, just refresh. Also we need to show and hide this loading on the scroll, and go to this callback function and here just make it, and after that once we got the response we need to toggle it, and even if there is any error, so just have the catch and here just say error and toggle false, and here it should be true. Now go to the UI, refresh, we are showing the icon, and just scroll down, we are showing it, scroll down again, we are showing loading. Yeah,